Okay. Daf Yomi is Kesubos Daf Yudal at Kesubos 14. We're going to start right at the very bottom of Kesubos Yud Gimel Amabez with the following discussion. Kahu Aros Varusaso, the Asl coming to Rav Yosef. So there's an engaged couple. They were betrothed to each other. They came in front of Rav Yosef, and the case is that she was pregnant. So she claims it's not a problem. I'm not disqualified. Mine, I became pregnant from him, and therefore I'm not disqualified from remaining married to him. And the child is not a mamzer. Whereas the betrothed man claims in Minai, yes, indeed, she became pregnant from me. So Tosfos says, how can he prove it was from him? That's a different discussion. When it's not the Daf Yomi, when we do it be'irn. So Amar Rav Yosef, my nichosh. Rav Yosef says, my nichosh. Why do we have to suspect her? I mean, it's all okay. First of all, chada the hakamodeh. First of all, the husband is admitting that he's the father, and so therefore the child is not a mamzer, and she's not disqualified from remaining married to him. And as we've been saying the last few days, there's a dispute between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua that's running throughout the second half of our first chapter of Kesubos. And in situations where the woman is pregnant, where she's seen with a man, Rabbi Gamliel says we believe her. Rabbi Yeshua says we don't believe her. So therefore, in this case, Rabbi Gamliel is saying we believe her. So if that's the case, we should believe her, and therefore we should not assume that she was pregnant from a different man. So two reasons to believe her. One is the husband admits it, that he's the father, and secondly, we pass him like Rabbi Gamliel. So that's what Shmuel taught. So Amar Abaye Ubaha Kilo Modeh Mikasher Rabbi Gamliel. So let's leave aside the question of whether or not the husband has admitted it or not. But even if the husband, let's say the husband had not admitted it, would we still say under these circumstances that Rabbi Gamliel would say we believe her and that she is kosher? But didn't Shmuel himself say to Rabbi Yehuda, Shinina, sharp one, halachak Rabbi Gamliel, va'at lo tavid uvda. The law is like Rabbi Gamliel, but yet you should not paskin like Rabbi Gamliel, i.e. believe her. Unless we're in a circumstance where the majority of the people in that circumstance who were able to have been with her were people who would not have disqualified her from the kahuna. They were ksherin. But here in this case, the majority of the people in the world are disqualified with her because she's engaged. So since anybody could have been the father, so therefore, and if she had been the father with anybody else, then that child would have been a mamzer because she'd be considered adulterous. So therefore, under these circumstances, why would Rabbi Gamliel, Shmuel says the law is not like Rabbi Gamliel under these circumstances. Adi Ikarok sharing that line. Here, there's a majority who are disqualified with her. So that's what Abaye says to his Rebbe Rav Yosef. So his Rebbe Rav Yosef responds. So his Rebbe Rav Yosef responds, "Otamech tikshucha hi gufa." So Rav Yosef responds to his student Abaye. He says, according to your logic, you have a question from the statement itself that it's very difficult. You said that Shmuel taught halacha va'at lo tavid uvda. That you're saying that Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda that the law is like Rabbi Gamliel, but yet we don't do it like him. Doesn't make sense. If the law is like Rabbi Gamliel, why shouldn't we do it? What must you say? Meaning to say is that we should only paskin like Rabbi Gamliel in a situation where most of the people were ksher in Islam, where the woman was surrounded by people, majority of the people in her vicinity are in her. Well, we're going to spend in the next couple of days, the daf is going to talk about how do we determine the majority. But assuming we could determine it, that the majority of people were kosher with her, then you could believe her. But if the majority of the people were not kosher with her, and so then under those circumstances, we would say not to, that ideally she shouldn't enter into marriage with them, but if she did, we would still believe her. In this case also, it's like the Evid. Why? Because she's already become pregnant by this man. And if you're going to disqualify her and disqualify the fetus, then you're going to say she's not allowed to remain with her betrothed, and the offspring would be suspicious. We would say that the offspring would be almost a suffix mamzer, doubtful mamzer, which is a very, very serious situation. So therefore, bid the Evid, after it's already done in this situation, we can believe her. That's what Shmuel is saying. That's what Rav Yosef responds to Abaye. So now that Abaye is entering into this conversation, Ramile Abaye Rabba or Rabba, depending on the girsa, that Abaye raised a question. If the question is to Rabba, it's to his Rebbe. If the question is to Rabba, it's to his colleague. So Ramile Abaye Rabba. So Abaye raised the question. Umi Amar Rabbi Yoshua Internemenis. Does Rabbi Yoshua really consistently say that we don't believe the woman? The concept that we don't believe her is basically stating that we're not going to presume that her existing status remains. As Rashi says, Alma lo mukminin la chazaka. We're not going to maintain her existing status, and we don't believe her, and we impugn her status. But is this really the case? But don't we have the following Mishnah from Mesachas Eidius? Eidius, the Mishnah there tells us, Veraminhu, we have a contradiction, because it says, Hayid Rabbi Yoshua Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira testified Almanas Isa Sheikh Sherel Kahuna, about an Almanas Isa, about the widow who's an Isa. Isa is doe, but we're talking about a case where the doe it's an expression of suffix, Rashi. It's an expression of doubt, because sometimes the dough is in doubt. We're not sure if the truma is mixed in with the chulin. We're not sure if it's tamei. So this widow who's in doubt, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira testified that she is kasher or kahuna, and that we can still allow her to marry a kohen. So what's the case of the Almanas Isa? We'll adopt Rashi's approach, even though there are multiple approaches amongst the Rishonim. So Rashi's approach says that what we're talking about here is that there was a woman, not the widow who we're talking about. There was a different woman, and this woman's husband threw her a get, and he says, if it's closer to you, you're divorced. If it's closer to me, you're not divorced. And we weren't sure whether the get landed in her vicinity or in his vicinity. And then he died. So we're not sure if she was a divorcee or a widow. It's a doubt. And then she goes ahead and marries another Kohen, in which case she's a doubtful, the offspring of that person, of that union. Since she's doubtful divorce, the offspring is a doubtful halal, because the Kohen's not allowed to marry a divorcee. And if somebody marries, a halal is allowed to marry somebody from the Jewish people, but if they do, their offspring cannot marry a Kohen. And so therefore, under these circumstances, the woman who marries a halal is not allowed to marry a Kohen. So therefore, under these circumstances, she's marrying a suffix halal. She's marrying a suffix halal. So this is what we called Almanas Isa, because after she marries this halal, her husband dies, and now we want to know if she can marry a Kohen. So under this circumstance of this Almanas Isa, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira testified that she's allowed to marry a Kohen. So we see from here that we are going to presume that her initial status is acceptable. So that contradicts what Rabbi Yeshua is saying in our Gemara. So Rabbi Yeshua doesn't seem to be consistent, asks Abaye. So Amrle, Rava or Rabba responds, Hachi Ashta, are these two cases the same? No, there's an obvious distinction. Hasam, in the case of the widow who's Almanas Isa, who we're calling this Almanas Isa, Isha Nises Bodekes Venises. So a woman, before she gets married, she's going to investigate the matter thoroughly. And she's going to have determined that really the first woman was not divorced, she was a widow. Therefore, her offspring is not a halal. Therefore, she can marry this boy and still marry a Kohen afterwards. Hacha, here in this case, Isha Mizana, Bodekes Mizana, you think before a woman is going to start being adulterous, she's going to check the matter out and see, does this person disqualify her from the Kohen? No. she's not going to be checking the matter first. She's just going to act out of passion or irresponsibly. And therefore we're not going to believe her, says Rabbi Yeshua, in our cases over here. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Rabbi Yeshua, Kasha, Rabbi Gamliel, Kasha. So Rava responds to Abaye, you're bothered by the seemingly contradiction between Rabbi Yeshua, where in the previous cases in our chapter, Rabbi Yeshua does not believe or does not maintain the chazaka, but in this case of the Amanasisa, he does. But what about Rabbi Gamliel? Rabbi Gamliel says, Ne'menes. Rabbi Gamliel says, we do believe her throughout the chapter. And there is a contradiction with the Seifa, Valkatani Seifa. In the concluding clause of that mission, Edios, it states, Armo Rabbi Gamliel, Kibalno Eduslem. Rabbi Gamliel says to Rabbi Yoshua and to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, listen, we accept your testimony of Omana says, Shari Gaza Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Shalo Ahev Loshiv based in Al-Kach. Yeah, we accept your testimony, but there's already a decree from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that we're not going to sit a court, make a court to rule that this woman can marry a Kohen. The Kohanim will listen to you to accept a stringency, but not a leniency. And the Kohanim will not marry her, but they won't marry her. So we see from here that Rabbi Gamliel says in that case, we don't believe her. We don't maintain her status quo. We don't allow her to marry a Kohen. So it seems to contradict what he's been saying in our chapter. So Rabbi Gamliel is also not a question, because Hasam there, and here we're talking about the cases we've had. Let's say we asked the woman, who were you with? And she says, I was with a kosher man who doesn't disqualify me from the Kohen. There she is, says Rabbi Gamliel, Bari. She was certain. She says, I know for sure I was with this kosher man. And so therefore I can marry a Kohen. But in this case over here with the Amanas Isa, the whole case is in doubt. It's a Shema. She doesn't know. It's a whole case is in doubt. She doesn't know if her husband's mother was actually divorced or widowed. So the whole thing is in doubt. So therefore, we're not going to rely upon her. The Rabbi Yeshua, Nami Lokasha, says Rava, and also Rabbi Yeshua is also not a difficulty. Why? Hasam, in the case of our Mishnah, where Rabbi Yeshua says we don't believe her, where we're saying that if she says I was with a kosher man, Rabbi Yeshua says we don't believe her, it's chad tzveika. We just have one doubt: was that man kosher for a Kohen or not? But hacha trace tzveike. But here there's two doubts, meaning it's once removed because it's not the initial case of the first marriage, but it's the second marriage, the offspring of that. It's more attenuated, and so therefore we're going to be able, it says Rabbi Yeshua, to believe it. This is not the classic case of svek sveika, and that's why some want to challenge Rashi's scenario and create a new scenario. But that's the simplest way to read the Gemara. That this is a second doubt, that it's more attenuated. So the Gemara says Hilkach Rabbi Gamliel. So according to, therefore, what's the upshot of this whole discussion? When Rabbi Gamliel, Bari, he's so strong, he so believes in this concept of Bari that if she's certain that if she says, I'm certain that man was kosher, and even though there's there's only one doubt whether or not this man was okay, we're going to believe her. V'kilei shema, and he's so, and he thinks the concept of whether or not she's certain is so weak that filu b'sfek sveika nami puzzle. Even if there's a double doubt, like the case of the Amanas Isa, he's still going to say it's disqualified, even though it's a case of Shema. Because it's a case of Shema, he's going to say it's disqualified, even though it's a Sfek Sveika. And with Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Yeshua says the concept of one doubt is so strong that he doesn't accept her testimony, that feel bibari nami puzzle, that even if she is so certain, we're not going to accept her testimony. The kill is fake Sveika, but he thinks if it's a double doubt, the case is so attenuated that he's going to keep her status. Tafil b'shema, even if she's not certain, nami machsher, he's still going to allow it. So says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan. Okay, now as the Gemara so often does, first the Gemara talks about a case, and then the Gemara says, well, let's define what we're even talking about. Ezuhi Almanas Isa. What is this case of what we're calling this Almana Isa, this widow who's a widow of a doubt? So what's the case? Kol she'ein ba lo mishum mamzeres. Any case of a woman where there is by the mixture. So what's an Almanas Isa? Kol she'ein ba lo mishum mamzeres. So any case where there's no doubt of that the person she was with was a possible mamzer, lo mishum nesinus, and that the person that she was with was not a possible nesin. And nesin is the people we learned a lot about in Yevamos. They're not allowed to marry into the Jewish people. Their conversion is suspect. Lo mishum avdei malachim, and they're not slaves. Why do they use the phrase slaves, servants of kings? So one theory is because the kings had a lot of money and they bought their way into the conversions. So anybody who's not that, those cases would not be called Almanas Isa. They would be disqualifying to her. But the only case that it's going to be allowed is if it's a suffix halal. That's the only case they testified about, that she's kshera l'kuhuna. If she married a person who was a suffix halal, but the suffix mamzer or a suffix nasin or a suffix avdei malachim, they wouldn't be okay. That's the position of the Tanna Kama. So yeah, just reviewing the Rashi. Rashi gives two theories as to why they're called Avdei Malachim. Either because they're the slaves of Shlomo, says Rashi, who were so wealthy and they were so powerful, and they married the daughters of the Jewish people, or alternatively, they're the descendants of Herod, who was a slave to the Hashmonayim, and he became strong, as the Gemara tells us in Baba Basra, and that's how he was able to take power and rule. So, but those people were disqualified. And so we're saying that in all those cases, if her husband has one of those doubts, then this widow is not going to be sheriff for a Kohen. And Rabbi Yeshua was not testifying about such a case. He was only testifying about Almanas Chalal. Amar Rabbi Meir, back to the Gemara. Meir says, Shamati, Kol she'ein ba'echad mikol elu masin l'kuhuna. Again, this source is going to need to be discussed by the Gemara. They're going to ask a lot of questions. But he says, I heard Kol she'ein bo, any one of these three, presumably, any one of these is not allowed to marry a Kohen. Any one of these questions is not allowed to marry to the Kohen. And then the Gemara is going to ask, at first glance, Rabbi Meir's position seems to be exactly like the Tanna Kama. Then we have a third approach here. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, Mishum Rabbi Meir, so it's a different Rabbi Meir. First, we had the Tanna Kama's Rabbi Meir. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar has a different tradition of what Rabbi Meir taught. And so, too, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Omer Kedvarav, Ezuhi Almanas Isa. What's the definition of Almanas Isa? Kol she'nitma b'safek halal. Kol she'nitma b'safek halal. So, what is it? What is this Almanas Isa? So any one case where the question about this widow is where she married a suffix halal, a person who's a doubtful halal, like the case we've been discussing that Rashi explained. And Rabbi Meir said, Makir and Yisrael mamzer and Shemaim. And what's the reason why if she married a suffix halal, she's going to be considered a Almanas Isa? Because the Jewish people recognize, they know their mamzerim amongst them. And so therefore, we're going to allow her, if she married a suffix mamzer, we're going to allow her to marry the Kohen, because if he really was a mamzer, they would have known. But the Jewish people don't know all their halalim. It's a much less well-known problem to be a halal. And so therefore, we're going to disqualify the almana if she married a suffix halal, because we're going to give more credence to the possibility that he was a halal. But this price, as we said, is there's a lot of questions on it. And the Gemara asks three questions now. First, Amar, Ezuhi Almanas Isa. What's the Almanas Isa? The first source, first part of this price. Kol she'ein ba lo mishum mamzeres, lo mishum nasinas, lo mishum avdei malachim. What's an Almanas Isa? Something that does not have any mamzer. There's no mamzer. That's not a Almanas Isa, or not nisin, or slaves of kings. which implies halal kosher. So if it would be a halal, that would be, then if it would be a suffix halal, she would be allowed to marry such a person. And so, but not if it's a suffix mamzer, nasin, or evet. So the Gemara asks, well, why? Why are we lenient about the halal, but not about these other cases? These other cases, the mamzer, the nasin, and the evet, they should also, they disqualify her to the kohen, and so should a halal if she marries a halal. Visu, and what's the second question? Amar Rabbi Meir, Shemati kol she'ein ba'achami kol elu masil kahuna. That anybody who does not have one of the does not have one of these three cases, you can marry the kohen. Well, Hainu Tanakama. The Gemara's second question is this: the Rebbe Meir in the Brisa is exactly the same thing as the Tanakama. So what's the difference between these two positions? And then Lisu, and furthermore, now a third question: Amar Rebbe Meir, Shemati kol she'ein ba'acham mikol elu masil lekahuna. We just said that. Lisu, and the third question is, Shimon Elazar says in the name of Rebbe Meir, Mishum Rebbe Meir, V'cheina Yirab Menashe Omer Kidvarav, that they say in the name of Rebbe Meir, Ezu Amanas Isa. They say, what is this definition of this Amanas Isa? Kol shenitma ba safek halal. They say the opposite. They say anybody who has a doubt if she married a halal, that's going to be considered an Amanas Isa, because Makirin Yisrael Mamzer Shebehem, Jewish people recognize, they know who are the mamzer, but they don't recognize their halal. But you just said in the first clause that the halal is kosher, and now you're saying the halal is not kosher. So Rabbi Yochanan says we have to understand what this price is referring to. So it says Rabbi Yochanan, mamzer tzavach, the halal shosek ikabenayu. Yochanan says we're referring to a case where the mamzer is soveach. The mamzer is shouting out, and the halal is quiet. That's the argument that's going on here. So Rashi tells us, Adam, a person shekeshek korin oso mamzer. When you call him a mamzer, who's soveach, he cries out. Shekorin oso halal, and when you call him a halal, he's shosek, he's quiet. That's the difference between Rabbi Meir and the Tanakama, and between the Tanakama of the Brisa according to Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon Elazar according to Rabbi Meir. That's the whole argument. That's a three-way argument here. So again, the mamzer, when you call him a mamzer, he cries out, and when you call him a halal, he's quiet. So let's see how it breaks down. Tanakama Savar, the first opinion is of the position, kol pasol to karoe v'shasik, v'shasik pasol. So he says any person who's disqualified, if you call him out and you say you're a mamzer and he's quiet, that's a sign that he's a mamzer, and therefore he's disqualified. And therefore, why? By the way, why if you call him a mamzer and he's quiet, do we say he's a mamzer? Because as Rashi says, that's an admission. Because we have a concept, shtika kodas, silence is like admission. So he should have shouted out if he's not a mamzer. And this is what the Bryce is saying. This is what the Tanakama the Bryce is saying. What's the question of what's the case of an Almanas Isa where Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Amuya are arguing that according to Rabbi Yeshua, this Almanas Isa is actually Kishera. What's that case? Any case where if they called you a mamzer or a nasin or a slave, you weren't quiet. But if you would have been quiet, she can't marry you. She's disqualified from kohen if she marries you. So he says any case where there's no shtuk mamzer, shtuk nasin, shtuk avdei malachim, or shtuk halal. That since the silence is going to disqualify you, we're not going to allow the Amana Isa in those cases. And so where's the Amanas Isa Kshera? Only in a circumstance where we know that her husband was a Safek Halal. That's where the Amanas Isa is Kshera. But if it's in a circumstance where we accuse her husband of being a Halal and he's quiet, no, that's not acceptable, and she's now disqualified. The Ka'amar Rabbi Meir responds, he says, yeah, the first three, the mamzer, the nisim, the eved, they're not allowed to marry to the Jewish people. So if you're quiet, that's a sign that you are indeed a mamzer nisin or evet. So hani who the kapasle bekahal aval shesok, but if you're and so therefore you're going to be disqualified, and she's disqualified from marrying into the kuna if she married you. But if you accuse him of being a chalal and he's quiet, kosher, he's quiet. The only reason he's kosher, and the only reason why he's quiet is mishum d'lo. He doesn't care. Why doesn't he care? Because he's still allowed to marry. The chalal is allowed to marry into the Jewish people. It's just if he marries a woman, that woman now becomes disqualified to marry a kohen. The Kamal Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar or Tanakama to Rabbi Meir, and so Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says to the Tanakama of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says to the Tanakama that Rabbi Meir taught, the meaning to say that the Rabbi Meir version of the Tanakama, Ishmielach the Malchshir Rabbi Meir b'shtika. So he says, if you heard that Rabbi Meir was really okay in a situation where there was silence, it's not, you didn't hear what you thought you heard. It was lo dekar lechalal v'shasik. Rameir didn't say that the widow is kosher if she married a halal who they called a person who they called a halal and he was quiet. No, it's just the opposite. El dekaru le mamzer v'shasik. It's only he only allowed in the circumstance where they called her husband a mamzer and he was quiet. V'hai deshasik savar mamzer kalaisli. The reason why he was quiet, he says, because look, if I was really a mamzer, everybody would know it, and so therefore everybody's going to know I'm not a mamzer. I'm a mamzer toveach v'chol shotzek posa. But what does Rabbi Meir say? So that's what Rabbi Meir says it's kosher. It's a mamzer shasik. But if the mamzer will be crying out or the chol will be quiet, he's disqualified. The mamzer were crying out, that's an indication the guy was speaking the truth, ironically. And if the chol is quiet, that there's no call to it and people don't know about it. So that's an indication that he's not objecting. Why? As the Gemara says, the reason why he's quiet, savar mistaya dom nafki mikahal. So what's the reason why the halal is quiet? What the halal is, according to the Rabbi Shimon ben Asya and according to Rabbi Shimon Elazar, it's version of Rabbi Meir, of the Tanakhama's version of Rabbi Meir. The reason why the halal who's shosik is disqualified, and we're going to consider him a halal, is because what's the reason why he was quiet? Because he said mistaye, because it'll be sufficient. They're just calling me a halal, and they're not going to investigate whether or not I'm a halal. The lo ma'afki mikahal. It says because they're not going to kick me out of the community, and so therefore he really is a halal. He says, but what do I care? They're not going to know more about it, and so because I can still marry in, and so therefore Rameir says we should disqualify him under those circumstances. So the Gemara says, Tani Chada, we have one brisa that states, Rabbi Yossi Omer Shasuk Mamzer Kosher. That a person is quiet when you call him a mamzer, he's kosher, and his silence is not an admission. But Shasuk Halal Pasal. But if you're quiet when you call him a halal, he's disqualified. And what's the reason? Because the reason why he's quiet, he's worried that if you're going to scream out about it, they're going to find that then in truth he is disqualified. But the mamzer who's quiet is kosher because he says everybody would know if I'm really a mamzer. I don't have to say anything. The Tanya Idach Shesuk Halal kosher, whereas the other source says if he's quiet as a halal, he's kosher because he says, what do I care? Because I can still marry into the community. But Shesuk mamzer pasal. But if you accuse him of being a mamzer and he's silent, he's disqualified because there his silence is in admission. So we see that these two sources are contradicting each other. Well, Kasha, the first source that says Shesuk mamzer is kosher, the Shesuk halal is pasal. That's the Tanakama Aliba de Rabbi Meir. That's the Tanakama according to Rabbi Meir, who he says that the Shesuk mamzer is disqualified, but the Shesuk halal is kosher. So that's the Tanakama Aliba de Rabbi Meir. Whereas the other source is Rabbi Shimon Elazar Aliba de Rabbi Meir. The other source that states, the mayor argues and says the shesuk halal is disqualified, but the shesuk mamzer is kosher. So the second brisa is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and the first brisa is like the Tanakama according to Rabbi Meir. Excuse me. Okay,